We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, well, have you heard about the Better Way conference? Of course you haven't. Well, you will tonight. Also, we'll discover the so-called postcode lottery for end-of-life care for children in the UK. Plus, we'll meet two women who have almost run 100 marathons in 100 days. All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Polly Middlehurst.
Neil, thank you. The top stories on GB News tonight. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that security in schools across the country needs to be ramped up. The former president was speaking at a National Rifle Association convention held just days after the murders of 19 primary school children and 2 of their teachers in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were gathered outside the arms show, holding up photographs of the dead children and calling for tighter gun controls. Trump, however, rejected their demands, instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of school security.
There should be strong exterior fencing, metal detectors, and the use of new technology to make sure that no unauthorized individual can ever enter the school with a weapon. No one should ever be able to get anywhere near a classroom until they have been checked, scanned, screened, and fully approved.
In other news today, Boris Johnson says the West is working to avert a global food crisis by releasing millions of tons of grain and corn currently blocked in Ukrainian ports. The Prime Minister told President Zelensky of Ukraine that Britain and the G7 are attempting to end the Russian blockade. President Putin has told leaders of France and Germany that Moscow is willing to discuss ways to make it possible for Ukraine to export the grain from Black Sea ports. Meanwhile, Russian forces claim to have taken control of a key rail hub in the eastern part of the country. That comes after officials in Kyiv say soldiers may need to retreat from their last stronghold there to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into the Luhansk region in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces still fighting to protect the area. Here, the UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said the risk to the public regarding monkeypox remains very low. This comes as Ireland confirmed its first case of the virus. The Health Service executives say the case was confirmed in the east of the country last night. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency said the number of cases in England was 101 and the total in the UK 106. Firefighters have been battling to extinguish a fire that's broken out on a super yacht in Devon. Social media footage shows black smoke billowing out and flames surrounding the yacht in the marina in Torquay. Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue says it has 5 fire trucks at the scene of the blaze. No injuries reported so far. Thousands of people are gathering in Belfast today to celebrate the centenary of the creation of Northern Ireland. A parade's been held, heading to Belfast city centre after speeches outside Stormont this morning. There were plans to celebrate 100 years since partition last year, but events had to be postponed because of the pandemic. Prince William has overseen the final dress rehearsal for next week's Trooping the Colour ceremony. As Colonel-in-Chief of the Irish Guards, the Duke of Cambridge led the parade on horseback, the 90-minute spectacle kicking off the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations over the bank holiday weekend. And the stakes are high as 60,000 Liverpool fans descend on Paris for tonight's Champions League final against Real Madrid. The Reds will take on the Spanish champions at the Stade de France. The final was originally meant to be held in St. Petersburg, but was moved to Paris after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The match is kicking off at 8 p.m. tonight, and Liverpool fans in the French capital are confident of victory.
We're going to win it. Yeah, definitely.
We're going to meet a group of lads in the fan zone later on this afternoon. Liverpool are going to win 3-1.
3-1?
My prediction.
Hard to comment. 2-0.
I think it'll go our way and it'll be 3-1.
Best of luck to them. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Now it's time for Neil Oliver Live.
The usual suspects have been in Davos again at the World Economic Forum, overseen by Klaus Schwab. The few hundred of the most unimaginably rich gathered in one place to fantasise together about what the several billions of us ought to be forced to do in order to make those billionaires' lives better. Those poor billionaires, for whom everything on earth might finally be perfect, if only someone would invent the vacuum cleaner big enough to suck every last one of us peasants, inconsequential specks of dust that we are, into outer space once and for all. While listening to whichever one on stage is pontificating about this or that technological advance or about how to better structure civilization itself, I find it best to imagine they have the high-pitched, excitable voices of children, like in those TV adverts for Chewy Jelly Sweeties. When I do that, I'm reassured by their evident ridiculousness, their patent lack of a grasp on the reality of what this human species of ours is all about. Some of their ilk talk blithely about the millions, billions of useless eaters who might best be controlled and placated by drugs and video games. I hear it announced that it's already time to hack the human animal and implant technologies to make us better at being alive in the world. Some of them are apportioning to themselves nothing less than the power of God. It's precisely that genetic failing of theirs, demonstrably present in one billionaire or technocrat authoritarian after another, that will always be their undoing in the end. That glitch, that Achilles heel common to all of them, is their failure to note the still limitless potential of the unadulterated human being Mark I. They think they have us mapped, tracked and traced already, but they don't. There's another thing they collectively overlook or deny, at least to themselves, while making their plans and cooking up their little magic potions, and it's fear, their own fear. Their all but overwhelming fear of all of us. Whether or not they're aware of it, they are motivated, those few hundred richists, by fear of the billions of us. They look out at us, down on us from their castle walls, and our presence in all our endless, untidy, unpredictable variety, and they're afraid. They don't really understand us. They don't really get us, and it's that which has made them fearful. People always fear what they don't understand. When you get right down to it, they'd probably rather we just weren't here. But we are here. We are here, and every last one of us, white, black or brown, tall or short, good at maths or good at growing plants or good at putting smiles on the faces of those around us, or whichever small fragment of the miraculous each of us has within us, every last one of us has the same unalienable right to a place on this planet as any one of them. Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, whoever, has no more right to be here, to live the best life available here than you or me. You may have heard or read by now about the slowly boiled frog. It's that notion that you can put a frog in a pot of cold water and turn on the heat beneath. Poor frog doesn't know what's happening, and so, according to the story, is slowly and unknowingly cooked to death. We're invited to think that we are like that frog, that we are helpless to identify the danger we're in, far less to extricate ourselves from our plight. Here's the thing, it's not true. Back in the 19th century, a scientist of sorts removed a frog's brain and found it would indeed remain in the steadily heating water until dead. But much more recently, in the 20th century, biologists tried the experiment with healthy, complete frogs and found that every single one of them leapt out long before it was in any real danger. Sometimes the frog wouldn't stay in the pot even when there was no heat under it at all. Clearly, the lesson there is that only brainless frogs get boiled alive. I would offer here a helpful analogy. We placed ourselves in a pot called the social contract. This is a way of describing the relationship we proles have with the state. Put simply, under the terms of the social contract, we agreed to behave and do our bit, and in return the state kept us safe from crime and undue suffering and protected our rights and freedoms. That was the deal. A while ago, though, even before the adventures of COVID-19, the state turned the heat on under the pot. It takes a while, and each one of us frogs becomes aware of the change at a different moment. But sooner or later, one frog after another realises the water has become unpleasantly warm and jumps out. I feel this is what is happening now. That's what's been happening for years. More and more healthy frogs with brains intact are getting out of the pot, turning their backs on the social contract. For those who thought they could cook us without us knowing, this is a frightening time. The billionaires, technocrats and autocrats can sit together in Davos and squeak excitedly to one another all they want, but they're in another pot, a pot of their own elitism, and the heat under theirs is rising too. I am wired to look back in time in search of answers to problems. Given the assumption that there's nothing new under the sun, that a version of whatever is happening now has likely happened in the past, I look to see how things played out. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Caledonians of the north faced off against a Roman army led by a Roman governor called Agricola. Among much else, the Roman Empire wanted submission from those people they deemed lesser, inferior. According to Agricola's son-in-law, Tacitus, the Caledonians were led by one they called Calgacus, which means the swordsman, who rallied his forces with these words, or words like them. To all of us, slavery is a thing unknown. There are no lands beyond us, and even the sea is not safe, menaced as we are. And thus, in war and battle, in which the brave find glory, even the coward will find safety, unpolluted by the contagion of slavery. The furthest limits of Britain are thrown open, and the unknown always passes for the marvellous. But there are no tribes beyond us, nothing indeed but waves and rocks, and yet more terrible Romans, from whose oppression escape is vainly sought by obedience and submission. Robbers of the world, having by their universal plunder exhausted the land, they rifle the deep. If the enemy be rich, they are rapacious. If he be poor, they lust for dominion. Neither the east nor the west has been able to satisfy them. Alone among men they covet with equal eagerness poverty and riches. They create a devastation and call it peace. I read about those Romans and see the model for every autocratic empire there ever was and that ever shall be, from whose oppression escape is vainly sought by obedience and submission. The Romans were the victors of the battle in question, but they never did win either the submission or the obedience of those Caledonians. The Roman Empire declined and fell, of course, as every empire must. Empires used to last for centuries. The most recent last for just years. They fall, the world kings, faster and faster every time. The strutting peacocks of Davos, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations and the World Health Organization are no Romans, but they want our obedience and submission and have endeavoured to obtain as much by stealth. They thought we wouldn't see them, wouldn't see what they were doing, that we wouldn't feel it, but we did, and we do. They sought to exploit our good nature. Give the devil his due, the social contract was good while it lasted. We had peace a lot of the time, rule of law, personal freedom and protected rights that passed from generation to generation. That was then though, and this is now. Now a handful of frightened billionaires and their enablers seek to make the pot a prison. By the manipulation of fear and the application of propaganda, they want us to be and to remain forever as frightened as they are. They tell those of us who've noticed that we're being silly, that nothing of the sort is happening. This is gaslighting, and that is the gas that's already lit under the pot. But look at what they've done. Having slipped and shouldered their way further and further into our lives, every aspect of our lives, they've only made a mess of everything. For all their wealth and their so-called wisdom, we're all about to get poorer, colder and hungrier. Already millions have had their health, physical, mental or both, hopelessly compromised. It's increasingly hard not to see this as having been the plan all along. After all, surely no one in authority is stupid enough to have caused all this harm by accident. As far as I'm concerned, the social contract has been broken. Not by we, the many law-abiding, tax-paying majority, but by the few of the state. Of course, an analogy only goes so far. We're not frogs. We are human beings. This is our country, our world. In the moment we decide collectively that we have nothing to fear from those who would take advantage of our good nature, in that moment the fear is gone, and somewhere in their hearts and somewhere in their heads, the billionaires in Davos must know it too. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. And I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show if time allows. With me tonight, my panel, Andrew Eborn, who's a lawyer and broadcaster, and Benjamin Loughnane, who's a research fellow at the conservative think tank, the Bow Group. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again, both. Andrew, how seriously should we take the likes of those gathered for the World Economic Forum?
I think it's extraordinary, and I do like your story about the frog, because never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. People regurgitate stories they hear for a long time, and it's a great example of having to sort of question everything, because we're in dire situations, and some of the language coming out of Davos does hint at that. And we're actually probably in the global economies facing the biggest threat since World War II. And you see the headlines screaming about whether it's eating or heating and so on and so forth. There are no solutions effectively offered. And that's the problem. And you look at that sort of time, you talk about fear. It was Edward Bernays who turned around, the father of PA, had PA as well, but father of PR. He said the best way to sell anything to anybody is through fear. So you work on that sort of basis. You give people lots of dramatic statistics. You sell that fear. You sell people regurgitating the same stories. And all of a sudden, if you don't offer solutions, then it causes panic. There are solutions when you start looking at it. And if you look at the stats and the figures and so on and so forth, you can work your way through that in an educated way.
Benjamin, Klaus Schwab famously, notoriously likes to say or to imply that he has influence all over. In governments, in Canada and France and elsewhere. Does he really? Should he be taken seriously when he says those things?
Yeah, well, I've often said, you know, in terms of conspiracy theories, the best thing you can possibly do for these people is to believe in them, because you create the sense that they are as powerful as they want you to believe that they are. Now, this idea that a group of elites are controlling the world and changing things, you know, well, they might be trying to, but do they actually have the power? Ultimately, there are 7 billion of us, and only a few of them. We have the numbers. You know, they can't control us without our consent, without our compliance. But when you have a defeatist attitude of, oh, these people are extremely wealthy and extremely powerful, and they're going to sort of, you know, play their games, and we're all going to just part of it, I don't think that's an accurate thing. You know, all it takes is for us to realise the power that we have and walk away, and they lose their power. And there's a great thing Chesterton said. He said it's better to be in the valley rather than on the peak, because from the valley you see great things, but from the peak you only see tiny things. And I think that's the problem. When you go up to the peak on your own and you look down and you see people as dots, you forget that they're human. You forget that those are individuals, and it's a lot easier to do evil things from a peak than from in the valley.
The honest answer to that, though, is what you want is both.
Yeah.
You want people at the top of the mountain looking down, and you need people on the ground as well, because by working, collaborating, that's what's going to happen. The interesting thing about this sort of stuff is, for the first time in maybe 50 years, they're reassessing globalisation. Because all of a sudden you're turning around and saying, does it really work when you've got to look after everybody? Or do we now draw up the drawbridge effectively and say, be self-centric? The US first on that sort of stuff is what Trump is saying.
Do you think our governments are in step with the thinking of organisations, unelected, unaccountable, like the WEF? Are they flattered by the attention? Are they seduced by the talk?
I think seduction is incredibly powerful. So I think the short answer is sometimes. But you look, for example, at the narrative Boris talking today about, OK, what do we do about the food crisis? And the statistics are really, really alarming. I mean, the word they use is dire. There will be famine in certain places as a result of this. And we were already in a difficult situation before the conflict in Ukraine, because obviously there were problems with the weather, which affects crops and so on and so forth. So we need to do something. And Boris today was looking at what we might try and do to ease that sort of side. How do we get the, 6 million tonnes of grain and 14 million tonnes of corn, which are being blocked at the moment? The knock-on effect for that is going to be felt for ages. So I think you're right, it is seductive, but you have to again question everything. And not everything's bad in the same way as not everything's good, in the same way as bringing that wonderful saying up to date is you need to have both the mountain and the valley to get the complete picture.
We'll come back to this. We'll come back to these topics. After the break, as the world's eyes were set on the globe's most powerful businessmen in Davos last week, another, I would say, equally important conference was held without the media fanfare. But why? Find out after the break. But first, here is some weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with sunny spells for most, though there'll be a cool breeze. Let's look at those details. The sunshine will continue this evening in the southwest, where it's been dry and bright today. Though out of the sun, it will start to feel a bit fresher this evening. In the southeast of England, skies will be a little cloudier, and there is a risk of a light shower for a few of us here. And in South Wales, a dry and largely clear evening with some late sunshine is on the cards, feeling cool out of the sun. It's looking a little cloudier in the Midlands than it has been this afternoon, with a risk of the odd shower. These are most likely close to the Peak District. Over to the north and east of England, an onshore breeze will bring a cool feel this evening, though for most of us here it will be dry. In southern Scotland, the weather will remain similar to the afternoon. There'll be a cool breeze in eastern areas, warmer in the west, especially in any sheltered sunshine. Northern Ireland can expect a fine end to the day, dry with clear spells, though, as with other areas, once the sun goes down, you'll need an extra layer. A mostly dry night, but by Sunday morning, showers will push into eastern coasts as the breeze picks up a little. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Last week, while world attention was focused on Davos in Switzerland and the World Economic Forum, a quite different gathering took place in Bath in Somerset. Organised by the World Council for Health, the Better Way Conference gave a hearing to voices and points of view that had been silenced, censored, ridiculed, banned or gaslighted elsewhere. A who's who of scientists and other specialists, Dr Tess Laurie, Robert Kennedy Jr., Dr Robert Malone, Dr Peter McCullough, Dr Rainer Fulmich, Brett Weinstein, a long list of those we have been discouraged from listening to. Also taking part was my next guest, Nick Hudson. Nick joins me now. Nick, you are the founder and chairman of PANDA, the Pandemics Data Analytics, which is a complicated acronym.
Terrible portmanteau, yeah. we came up with it very quickly.
You were there in the conference in Bath. Why do you think it passed without any media attention at all, given the nature of the people who were there and what so many of them had to say?
Because almost everything that was said contradicts a completely false narrative that mainstream media have been, shoving out at us for 2 years. We're an embarrassment, and it really is time now for that message to start breaking through, and I think it will. That the whole narrative of the COVID story was false, was disinformation, and the countering views were not heard because of the unbelievable levels of censorship that we've seen.
You and your colleagues at PANDA have described what happened in terms of the global response to COVID as having torn a great rent in the fabric of society. Is that hyperbolic, or is that really as you saw it and see it?
No, I mean, there was an unbelievable tear. If you look at the catastrophic damage to the working classes, the middle classes, to the entrepreneurial sector, to industries like travel and entertainment and so on, I mean, there really is a huge devastation and no real sign of anybody getting back to near the former levels they were at. And it's the arts, it's all of the things that really foster human interaction and the best aspects of human nature that have been squashed alongside all of those sectors that I'm talking about. So for me, it really does seem like a tear in the fabric of society, and a very severe one.
I don't think I'm wrong in saying that some voices have been turned down to zero on the volume control, while others have been artificially amplified. Are there signs of hope of a return to some kind of balance? The sort of voices that you and I were listening to in Bath, do you think they will increasingly be heard? Has the time come when people are hungry enough for something else to listen to?
I think there's definitely demand, and the throttling of supply, though, is still very much in evidence. I was kicked off Twitter a couple of months ago, and that was the product of violating their community standards. There's no requirement that I needed to have lied or given out disinformation or something of that nature. They just simply decide it's not off-narrative messaging. Off you go. And I think there are many of us who are in exactly that position still. You see the shadow banning that goes on in all of the social media platforms. Our videos, which are scrupulously referenced. We are very careful to reference everything to material in scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, those videos will be pulled down. Not because they're false, because they're off narrative. And it just continues, and there's no sign of that part stopping. And so until we have established alternatives, I fear that the censorship will continue.
Well, one of the things I like about Panda, apart from everything's in black and white, you talk about replacing flawed science with good science. And you basically get an expert, and you say peer-reviewed, because all of a sudden everybody becomes an expert on everything. Before Brexit, everybody was a constitutional expert. During the pandemic, everybody's a virologist. What would you classify are good examples of your open science and rational debate and the flawed science that we've had?
Yeah. Well, look, first and foremost, the essence of good science is to stimulate an environment of conjecture and criticism. So you have to have debate, and you have to have multiple opinions. Otherwise, there's no selection process.
Right.
Knowledge creation in general is fundamentally an evolutionary process, and science as a subset is no exception, obviously. So the first thing is that conjecture and criticism. The second thing is making sure your teams are multidisciplinary.
Right.
So we are not of the opinion that, well, don't listen to him because he's not a virologist.
Yes.
You know, an epidemic is a complex phenomenon. The whole political response has got nothing to do with virology or medicine or public health. It's very often motivated by other things. So we want to see diverse teams with, yes, your medical and epidemiological and virological people on board, but also ecologists and political scientists and data scientists and engineers who bring a different mode of thought, different perspective.
And that's always the problem, isn't it? Because what happens is people surround themselves normally with people who share the same views. They read the same newspapers that reflect those views. They watch the same news channels that basically will do all of that. So you're basically enforcing your own prejudices. You need the people who question you. You need the people who are no people.
Benjamin, have you seen precedent for this kind of behaviour before? Where, as Nick says, you want a conversation, you want a debate, you want to hear both sides, and yet one side has been conspicuously silenced.
Well, I think one of the key things with scientific method is the idea that you have a theory and you try to disprove it, and if you can't disprove it, then it stands to the theory. You don't have a theory and then try to prove it. That's not science, that's ideological. That is almost like a religious belief rather than a scientific one. So you should try to argue against your own case. And when you start to see that happening, it's not science that's taking over, it's not following the science, it's following a cult. And I think that was the key thing over the past 2 years, is they came up with a theory and spent the whole time defending it, and anyone who questioned it and said, well, hang on, look at this data, it wasn't a case of we're going to argue against you, it was a case of you're banned from Twitter, you're not allowed, you're not being platformed on our shows, this, that and the other.
Do you think there was a justification for what happened in the beginning? I keep asking people this, I suppose, in a perpetual hope of balance. When whatever COVID is first appeared among us, at any point was the response measured and appropriate?
No, and they knew they were lying. You know, at the very beginning in February came this idea of a novel virus, a new virus, and the International Committee on Viral Taxonomy was trying to tell the WHO, this is not a new virus, this is an individuum of the original SARS that we sequenced and studied in 2003. And the World Health Organization would not listen. There was a vast amount of political pressure put onto to members and the organization at the ICTV. That paper was removed and replaced with another one that gave this disease a new name. It should have been called SARS. And they gave it this special new name, and that they used to propel another falsehood, which they knew was false. You know.
So you're saying the virus was not unknown at the time that it appeared?
It was not a new.
At the time we were made aware of it.
Obviously, there are in any viral outbreak, sequential viral outbreaks, you will have variants and you know, just small mutations and not very consequential. And they knew that they were dealing with an old virus. And they used the myth of a new virus to propel the idea of universal susceptibility or immune naivety, which then allowed all those modelers to really say, look, anybody can get it and anybody can die, which was false. And we also knew that in February of 2020.
What do you say, Nick, to the people who say that it was it's not behaving in the way that viruses normally behave, and it's given rise to the theory that it was manufactured in a lab? What do you say to that?
So I don't really have a lot of time for this kind of exceptionalism of COVID. The list of conditions that describe, you know, what most of the people experience is no different from any other respiratory virus. You know, it really isn't. This is like a cold or a flu, and for most people. And the sequelae and the severe symptoms and so on, yeah, okay, maybe those have their own characteristics, differentiating them from other respiratory viruses, but there's nothing new in that. And so the whole, I mean, to me, one of the mistakes that is made is people overestimate the ability of these guys to come up with bioweapons. I mean, the relationship between the genes of a virus and its phenome, the expression in the real world, is a very, very complicated story that doesn't have only to do with the sequence. It's got to do with the interaction between that sequence and the human body and our immune systems, which are spectacularly complex entities.
Are we being invited to overestimate the abilities of those who are telling some of the narrative?
I suppose so.
Because it's always in any organisation's interests for it to be uncertain just what they're capable of. If they're overestimating your abilities, then
it's a very good point. I mean, you talk about surrounding yourself with people with contrary views as well.
Yes.
There must be some within Panda who disagree with you and say that the approach was right. We should have all these lockdowns, wear the mask, all these social distancing.
Not that far. I mean, because I think there's substantively no evidence in favour of, no high-quality evidence in favour of lockdowns and mask wearing. I mean, that's all bananas stuff. We have hundreds of papers. Even Johns Hopkins University now acknowledges that lockdowns are an exercise that should never have been tried and should never be repeated.
And they had exercise. I mean, talk about that. There were a number of secret government exercises.
They weren't actually secret. They were available on the internet for all to see.
Well, you can the best way of hiding anything is in clear sight.
I think I'm right in saying that governments would stand on a stack of Bibles as tall as themselves and say that it was an unknown virus. I mean, and that would be, and if indeed they were telling the truth, then that would have been the justification for the lockdowns and for the rest.
Yeah, but they were being told that it was a new virus, and people were lying to them. Yeah.
A big part of the conference in Bath was looking ahead. And there was also a theme of regulatory capture, the academia, the world of science, the world of politics, the world of the media, all had been captured by an ideology.
Yes.
The one ideology, the same ideology. If that being the case, give the devil his due, if that is actually what has happened, what is the way ahead to reclaim or to replace those institutions? How do we start that better way?
Yeah, I mean, it's an unprecedented situation, and the creation of new knowledge is an unpredictable process, fundamentally unpredictable. So we need new knowledge to work out how to deal with corruption of this extent. But to me, the essential ideological concept that needs to be challenged is the whole doctrine of pandemic preparedness, which is getting a lot of airtime at the moment. And as we begin to see these notions like One Health policy, which tries to pull together pandemic preparedness, climate change, and war, wars on terror, wars on domestic terror, this kind of structure. As we see those three forming under one banner, the One Health notion, you begin to see how important it is that we push back to that kind of public health ideology of basically ignoring all other public health priorities and focusing on this one thing, which is a mythical kind of...
That's got to be right, hasn't it? Because I think people have taken the spotlight off the things which have killed far more people, like cancer and so on and so forth. You're dealing later on in the programme about those terrible sort of end-of-life care and so on and so forth. That comes out of the narrative.
Benjamin, centralising the search for solutions, I don't think historically has ever been a good idea, has it? To imagine that 5 people in a room can come up with the answers, and thereby necessitating the exclusion of the thousands of people outside the room. That never works.
Well, this is what I was saying earlier about the sort of bird's eye view. When you're so far away from the people who you're making decisions for, you're not actually, you're not among them. You don't see the effects of it. And when you're focused in a myopic way on one particular virus and its one particular spread, its one particular effects, you're ignoring all of the knock-on effects of that policy making. People dying due to mental health issues that come out of lockdown, people dying from missed cancer screenings, children not learning how to properly communicate or talk and being stunted, also being stunted emotionally, developmentally, socially. All of these knock-on effects from having a myopic view of one particular danger and only targeting that, you leave the rest of yourself exposed. It's like locking one door in your house and throwing open the rest, and people coming in.
But it does beg the question, though, what should have been done? Because if you're Grand Panda, if you're dismissing all of that as the dystopian view and so on and so forth, what should have been done?
They should have implemented their own guidelines.
Which should have been. What would those guidelines have been?
It was
You
vulnerable,
identify the
let
groups who are at
everybody
risk.
else on.
Yeah, you identify the groups who are at risk.
Right.
Concentrate your resources on protecting them and let everybody, as fast as possible, continue with their lives.
How would you protect those at risk?
So, I mean, the first thing is to make sure that they are relatively less likely to be exposed than the rest. You want everybody out and about, everybody else out and about, circulating that virus until you get to the so-called herd immunity. And then the disease wanes. And what you want is as few vulnerable people as possible in the exposed group. And it doesn't mean putting them in jail or locking them down. It's simply a matter of making sure that they just take care.
And that was the time-honoured plan, wasn't it? That was the plan that had been arrived at after consideration over a protracted period of time.
But the wording was so guidelines, though, wasn't it? Herd immunity, and this is why people objected at the time. And language is so important, isn't it, when you're selling a message?
The term's not even used in the guidelines. It's one of the technical assumptions, But those 2019, there was a 2019 update on the pandemic respiratory virus guidelines of the World Health Organization. They didn't even consult them. They tore that update up and threw it away and proceeded down a route that had never been attempted for, with a strategy that very quickly showed evidence that it wasn't working and was causing great harm, and then persisted with that strategy for 2 years. That's political.
Yeah. I suppose it's beholden upon me, obviously, to say that the government, if they were here, would say that they responded in the way that they thought was appropriate given the evidence that they had, and that is what they said. This is a conversation clearly that could run. Nick Hudson, founder and chairman of Panda, I could listen to so much more of this, and I could let this conversation run on for the rest of the 2 hours.
We'll do it. Over a curry. It's got to be good.
Any time.
Sadly, we'll have to move this on. After the break, what's it like to rub shoulders with some of the world's powerful businessmen at the World Economic Forum? We'll find out from someone who did just that and what she discovered. That's coming up after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick.
Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, for most of us, the World Economic Forum gathering in Davos in Switzerland feels like a galaxy far, far away, a distant world where the super rich and the technocratic elite plan the future to suit themselves. My next guest, though, was part of a team reporting from that netherworld during the 4 days of the gathering on behalf of a Canadian news agency, so she was able to see for herself who and what goes on there. Sophie Corcoran is also familiar to GB News viewers as a commentator and broadcaster, with a particularly keen eye on the ways in which students and other young people are being affected by events, foreign and domestic. And she joins us Now, it's great to see you. So if I've wanted to have you on this show for a long time now, so I'm delighted that you're here. And it's particularly pertinent and appropriate because you've done something that none of the rest of us have. You were there in Davos. What was it like? What did you see and what did you do?
As I said, it's the most bizarre experience of my entire life. So, to paint the picture for you, the town in Davos was completely constructed. So the shop fronts were fake. There were fake shop fronts. It was made the day before.
No.
Yeah, it's completely constructed, and I wish I was there to see them pull it down. But the entire thing is just so bizarre. I mean, we were in a remote location in the middle of the Swiss Alps. It wasn't near a large city like Geneva or Zurich. It was a long travel away, and there was just military officials there. It was just the biggest bubble I think I've ever been in my entire life. But the whole thing was fake, all of it.
Did you see any of the likely suspects? Did you interact with any of the delegates who were there to, restructure the world?
We spoke to loads of them, and I actually spoke to a Colombian, high-ranking military official who said that we wanted climate lockdowns to improve mental health. So the whole thing was just crazy. I mean, it was just like Nick Clegg and all these rich elites walking around with their cars idling. There were hundreds and hundreds of cars left on idle all day. It was bizarre. I'm a working class girl from Thurrock. It was bizarre.
So what kind of, beyond, I can only really imagine the impact that it had on you in that sense. But when it came to the store of your wisdom, what did you come away from it having learned? You were there recovering it as a reporter. What did you come away having understood?
Well, the WHO and the WF are a massive attack on democracy. The people in those buildings are unelected bureaucrats. They are unaccountable. They are in a remote location in the Swiss Alps with, a police state. Nobody can go in, a secure zone, an accredited media, and the media that were there, so the media that were accredited to, ask the questions and be in the conferences, also sponsored the events, also have people as part as guests of the event. I mean, it is a gross attack on democracy because normal people like us are a million miles away, but yet these decisions that are made in these conferences are so telling of what the future is going to be like.
Do you subscribe, though, to the belief that the decisions they make there actually matter, or are they selling as a confidence trick?
Well, I would say before they did actually matter, but this year was actually quite unusual because there were no G7 leaders there, which I think shows something. And what it shows is that they know, the G7 leaders know, that the people do not like the World Economic Forum, and that is not something that they want to be associated with. And as it should be, because we also went to the World Health Assembly in Geneva on the last day, and obviously we've got the pandemic treaty. And for Boris Johnson to be involved with these things is a massive betrayal of the British people, purely because 17 million people in this country voted for Brexit, and we voted to leave the European Union on the premise that we would rid ourselves of unelected bureaucrats from foreign countries telling us how to lead our country. And that's exactly what the WF and the WHO are, and that is what they do. So if he does sign the treaty and he does engage with these things, then he is not only betraying Brexit, but he's also betraying the British people quite massively.
It's very interesting for me to hear you say that, because I know that you have been a card-carrying supporter of the Conservative Party since your mid-teens.
Yep.
And you've put yourself forward as a candidate for the Conservative Party. When you watch Boris Johnson and the rest of his cabinet in relation to the kind of tactics that are being discussed in the WEF and the World Health Organization, do you review your feeling for that party?
I did, yeah. I don't support globalisation. I'm a pro-patriot. I like the fact that we should make our own decisions. I mean, that's the reason why I would have voted Leave. Obviously, I was in year 8, so I didn't get the opportunity, but I would have done. Do I want a Labour government? No. Will it be worse than a Labour government? Yes. And that's probably one of the largest factors of why I am still a Conservative, and a whole host of other views. But on this principle, I do not agree with it. And that is why I'm very happy that Boris Johnson was not there, and why I also believe that he shouldn't sign that treaty. And I think he knows deep down that he shouldn't sign it either.
Benjamin, what's your reaction to hearing, the notion of a confected fake reality? What does that make you think?
Sort of a great metaphor, really, for the whole thing, is that everything's fake, everything's edifice, and lacks substance and will be torn down very soon. And hopefully that does apply also to the World Economic Forum, which I think is lacking in substance and likes to parade its power but really doesn't have as much power as it thinks, and hopefully will tear it down soon as well.
Does the intention go away, though, just because the fake shop fronts fall down? The intention behind them, does it just relocate and reshape and evolve, but continue on under another guise?
Well, I think it's telling that no G7 leaders were there. Clearly, the public support for the WF is at its lowest point ever after the past couple of years. A few years ago, they would have all been there merrily shaking hands and getting together like they do at all their summits. But clearly, it's such a toxified brand now that they're steering well clear of it, although perhaps that might be something more to do with not making Joe Biden's absence conspicuous.
Andrew, Sophie was talking about the World Health Assembly and the fabled pandemic treaty.
Yes.
Do you take talk of that pandemic treaty seriously? I mean,
Well,
clearly,
I love the concept. I love the concept.
Does it have teeth?
Yeah, of basically of Sophie's doing, this is basically Disneyland for the unaccountable and unelected. I mean, if you're looking on that sort of basis, what we were touching on previously, which we haven't spoken about publicly, is first of all why nobody's getting up there and saying enough of this. We don't believe in it anymore. The fact that world leaders, G7 leaders, stayed away, is that them voting with their feet? Do you think?
Yeah.
And also, I would ask, because there were 2,500 people there,
Yes.
which is a glorious fusion of world leaders, head of this, billionaires, and so on and so forth, but loads of journalists. Who were the journalists asking, the media were there, who were the journalists and what were the questions they were asking and why didn't they ask the questions we want to
They
hear?
weren't asking questions, and the reason why is because the likes of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post had their own shop fronts. They sponsored the events. They had guests that are invited that worked for those companies, not to be invited to be journalists, but to be invited as guests. They are in the club. And that is the biggest point of this, is how can we trust the media to be transparent, to be honest, when they're part of the club? And one of the most interesting things that I found, and one thing that was very easy for us as journalists, is that they had colour-coded passes. So they had colour-coded passes, so you could see who were the most of the elite and who were the riff-raff.
What was your colour pass?
I didn't even have one.
Oh, you didn't have one?
No, I'm the riff-raff at home.
Presumably, at some level, those journalistic organisations were there as independent observers and chroniclers of what was going on.
No, they weren't. The only independent people there were us at Rebel News. That was it.
And what was the conversation that sent you out there? What was the intention of your group going there? What did you want? What was the number one question that you wanted to ask?
I think each as an individual we had our own things. For me, I wanted to basically show the world the hypocrisy of these people. And that's what we saw because, you know, I actually went to the private jet airport. There were loads of them, Cars Island, and they want, you know, to make us pay extra tax for our government to fix climate change. They don't want us to fly. They want us to eat bugs. They want digital surveillance and ID, but yet they're there hidden behind their little secure zone with nobody looking in. They've got immense privacy. Same as open borders. Again, they're hiding behind their own little secure zone. That's what they want. They don't want gun control, yet everybody there was armed to the absolute teeth. The entire thing was just complete and utter grotesque hypocrisy. And I want young people to understand this because these are the people that are doing this nonsense in my generation's name. They're saying we're going to create a better world for the Greta Thunbergs of the world. And in actual fact, Neil, this going to the World Economic Forum has made me so almost depressed and so concerned for what the world is going to look like for my generation because these are the people that are in charge of it. And I don't want Tedros in charge of health of this country. I don't want Klaus Schwab in charge of the policies in this country. I want my own elected government.
But it's sounding as though, from what you're saying, the hollowness and the lack of commitment from the G7 in terms of voting with their feet by staying away. To some extent, it sounds as if the air has already gone out of that.
Well, it's extraordinary.
It's collapsing.
I still wouldn't say.
But I find it extraordinary, and I think this is why we should call it out. You turn around and say, look, why are they staying away? Why are journalists, which is a massive accusation, not asking those questions? I mean, you're from Durham. I'm from Durham as well. We love you. Hey, wonderful university. I didn't play for Leyton Orient, though. So.
Did anyone ask, Sophie, did anyone say, why are the G7 not here?
Exactly, that's the question.
Did anyone ask of that gathering, why is no one of significance here listening to what you have to say?
No, because I think it's pretty clear. The people are fed up of the World Economic Forum, and it is an electoral downfall. People are angry. People don't want leaders that are with the WF. Why? Because it is a massive attack on democracy, and there is without a shadow of a doubt that the world would be a much, much better place if the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization didn't exist.
But the biggest problem here, and this is a massive thing we should emphasise, is that the major media, seasoned journalists, if you're saying, because there's one little tag system, whatever colour you've got, you're going to be a good boy or girl and sit in the corner and eat your chocolate and your Swiss whatever, and not ask nasty questions, that's a damning damning report on media, isn't it?
It's extremely concerning, and that was one of the most disgusting things I found out when I was there, that not only are media being part of the event, sponsoring the event, and they're the only ones that are being given the opportunity to ask the questions. So the ones that are in the club are the only ones that are actually allowed to ask the questions.
What would those media people say if the journalists were sat here, because it goes to their fundamental credibility as journalists, if they were sat here, what would they say?
Sophie, it's fantastic to hear from an eyewitness. Basically, that's my contention. It's brilliant to hear your opinions. They're your opinions, and it's very interesting to hear them coming straight in, sort of fresh off the plane back from Davos. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that to us.
Bring chocolates next time.
We will have to move this on because I've got to get to a break, but Sophie Corcoran, commentator, thanks very much for your time. After the break, not one but two Great Britons who are attempting to run not one but 100 marathons in 100 days. We'll be meeting them after the break if they've got the break.
On a busy Mark Dolan tonight, my Mark Meets guest is political firebrand and broadcaster George Galloway. He tells his amazing story at 10. In The Big Question, with a booze culture in Westminster, should alcohol be banned from all workplaces? We've got the papers at 10:30, and on my panel, ex-Lib Dem MP Lembit Opik. And in my big opinion, the Partygate-obsessed mainstream media are out of touch with what matters to you, the British people. Bring a bottle, and I'll see you at 9.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello again. Thanks for staying with me. My Great Britons this week must surely be contenders for the most exhausted people in the country. If I have it right, Faye Cunningham and Emma Petrie have just completed, I think, their 99th marathon in as many days. And if they notch up their 100th tomorrow, they will also secure for themselves a place in the Guinness Book of Records. The weary and presumably severely blistered duo join me now. Hello, both. Are you there?
Hi.
Hello. Oh, good. There you are. I didn't. After 99 marathons, I wasn't sure what condition I expected to find you both in. Away to wee greasy spots. I thought maybe just puddles on the floor, but you look very well. Why?
Yeah, we're seated, so that helps.
Am I right? Have you just done marathon number 99? Is my arithmetic correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we did it this morning before driving down this afternoon to Edinburgh because we're completing number 100 tomorrow at the Edinburgh Marathon.
I was going to ask if you had done 99 marathons around the same route, or whether you were able to mix it up and get at least a different view while you were putting yourself through it all.
Yeah, we've done a good mix. We've done everything from Aberdeen up to Braemar, mixing up routes each time. Done some of the same routes, but yeah, we've tried to keep it varied just for the mind.
It beggars belief, actually. I think, 100 marathons in 100 days. I don't know where to begin thinking about that, but why have you inflicted this Herculean challenge upon yourselves and each other?
Well, we wanted to do a big challenge to push our limits and to inspire people. So we decided the 100 marathons in 100 days so that we could get a lot of people involved. People could run parts of the marathons with us, also complete the Edinburgh Marathon tomorrow, potentially with us, and to raise some money for Macmillan and Motor Neurons Disease Association, because Faye lost her dad earlier this year to MND, and I lost my mum 2.5 years ago to cancer. So we wanted to give something back to those charities who were really supportive in those difficult times.
With that in mind, I think I'm right in saying that the philosophical underpinning for what you're doing is that you've come to appreciate, if you didn't already, that health and well-being and even just the ability to move and to run, these are things not to be taken for granted.
Absolutely, yes. The strapline to what we're doing is to do it while you can, because both our parents had it taken away from us and we've got the ability to run and enjoy being outside. So we're trying to encourage people to push themselves, maybe do that marathon they've wanted to do, or go up that mountain they've wanted to climb, go on that bike ride, and just do it while you've got the chance, because you never know when it's going to get taken away from you.
My guests here in the studio, Andrew Eborn, is nodding along enthusiastically, listening to what you're saying. I think that maybe there was a question you wanted to ask.
I love it. Congratulations to both of you, which is fantastic. And I used to work very closely with Guinness World Records, and I know they try to encourage as many people as possible to come up with records. So, for example, in the 2019 event, which we had here, there were 40 new Guinness World Records done, including the fastest time dressed as a tent, which is glorious. I can tell you that the record so far, there is Alicia Clark, who did 95 marathons in 95 days, but Kate Jaden has done 100. There's also a South African called Jackie Hunt Broesma, I think is her name, and she's an amputee, encouraging people to do absolutely everything, and she's already run 104. So my recommendation to you is keep going, if you can, because then you're better to get your records. But I think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant and a real inspiration.
Absolutely it is, Emma and Faye. How much do you stand to earn, to raise for your charities? What's the figure that you've got in mind?
Well, we're going for 100,000. We're at 22 at the moment. We thought we'd go big. We'll see how it goes. But we were aware of the other two record attempts that are unverified at the moment, but we are going to push it and go to 106 to finish next Saturday.
Fantastic! You're an, as all the Great Britons that I tried to turn a light on in this part of the show, you're an inspiration. You've come out of sad experiences yourselves in recent times, and you've turned it into you've metamorphosed that into something that's uplifting. And shows that there's always the opportunity for triumph ahead. So all the best of luck for tomorrow, and keep on going. Absolutely, keep running. It's what it's all about. So thanks for joining us. Wonderful stuff. This is Neil Oliver Live. Still more to come, but first, a little bit overdue, and that's my fault. Here's the news from Polly Middlehurst.
Thanks, Neil. Good evening. Your top story tonight. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that security in schools across the country should be ramped up. The former president was speaking at the National Rifle Association convention held just days after the murder of 19 primary school children and 2 of their teachers in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were gathered outside the arms show, holding up photographs of the dead children and calling for tighter gun controls. Trump, however, rejected their demands, instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of school security.
There should be strong exterior fencing, metal detectors, and the use of new technology to make sure that no unauthorized individual can ever enter the school with a weapon. No one should ever be able to get anywhere near a classroom until they have been checked, scanned, screened, and fully approved.
Well, here Boris Johnson says the West is working to avert a global food crisis by releasing millions of tons of grain and corn, which is currently blocked in Ukrainian ports. Prime Minister told President Zelensky of Ukraine that Britain and the G7 are trying to end the Russian blockade. President Putin has told the leaders of France and Germany that Moscow is willing to discuss ways to make it possible for Ukraine to export grain from Black Sea ports. Meanwhile, Russian forces claim to have taken control of a key rail hub in the eastern part of the country. That comes after officials in Kyiv in Ukraine say many soldiers may need to retreat now from their last stronghold to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into Luhansk in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces still fighting to protect the area. Here, the UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said the risk to the public regarding monkeypox remains very low. This comes as Ireland confirmed its first case of the virus. The Health Service executives say the case was confirmed in the east of the country last night. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency said the number of cases in England is 101, with the UK total being 106. Firefighters are still battling to extinguish a fire that's broken out on a super yacht in Devon. Social media footage shows black smoke and flames billowing from the yacht in the marina in Torquay. Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service says it has 5 appliances at the scene of the blaze. No injuries so far being reported. Thousands of people gathered in Belfast today to celebrate the centenary of the creation of Northern Ireland. A parade headed to Belfast city centre after speeches outside Stormont this morning. There were plans to celebrate 100 years since partition last year, but events had to be postponed because of the pandemic. Prince William has overseen the final dress rehearsal for next week's Trooping the Colour ceremony. As Colonel of the Irish Guards, the Duke of Cambridge led the parade on horseback. The 90-minute spectacle will kick off the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations over the bank holiday weekend. And just lastly, the stakes are high as 60,000 Liverpool fans descend on Paris for tonight's Champions League final clash with Real Madrid. The Reds taking on the Spanish champions at the Stade de France. The final was originally meant to be held in St. Petersburg, but was moved to Paris after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The match kicks off at 8 p.m. tonight, and Liverpool fans in the French capital are confident of victory.
We're going to win it. Yeah, definitely.
We're going to meet a group of lads in the fan zone later on this afternoon. Liverpool, we're going to win 3-1.
3-1.
My prediction.
Hard to comment. 2-0.
Well, I think it'll go our way, and it'll be 3-1.
Fingers crossed. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now let's get back to Neil Oliver, live.
Welcome back, and thank you for that, Polly. The eternal optimism of football supporters is also always uplifting. God bless them all. Joining me over the next hour are my panel, Andrew Eborn, who's a lawyer and broadcaster and futurist.
Absolutely.
Futurologist, I'm never quite sure which term.
A bit of both, it's just analogy is always good.
And Benjamin Loughnane, who's a research fellow at the Conservative think tank Bow Group. Thank you for staying with me. OK, here in the second hour we tackle another big topic. There's a storm coming, I think it's fair to say. Energy bills to soar by thousands of pounds. And let's imagine the figures bandied about, like a £2,800 hike are the least of it. Earlier this month, the Governor of the Bank of England warned of a, quote, very real income shock and, quote, apocalyptic food prices. Andrew Bailey, for it is he, also said he felt, quote, helpless in the face of soaring inflation. So, shock, apocalyptic, helplessness. Those are not words you want to hear from those at least nominally in charge. Joining me now to consider just how bad things really are and how bad things might get is GB News' own economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Thanks for joining us.
No wonder we're called dismal scientists, us economists.
I think we're at a pitch now, we're in a place now that is so fascinating that at least it's a counterbalance to how frightening it all is. Are we in uncharted territory? Are we in an economic situation the like of which we have not seen?
I don't think we are in terms of how, this isn't the 1930s. There's a welfare state, there's all kinds of checks and balances in the modern world, which there weren't even in living memory. So I think we should say that at the outset. But it certainly feels like the 70s when you and I were wee lads, Neil, if I may use that terminology. We are in a situation where inflation is going to get well into double digits. The official number now is 9%. The consumer price index, 9% higher than it was this time last year. I think for a lot of ordinary people watching and listening to this show, the idea that the cost of living has only gone up 9% over the last year is a sick joke. It's gone up a lot more than 9%. Energy bills have almost doubled. Food prices are much higher. Your rent's gone up a lot more than 9% in many cases. Interest rates now are 4 times higher in terms of where the Bank of England has set them than they were this time last year. So I do think inflation's high. That feels like the 1970s. It also feels like the 1970s to a degree in that wages are lagging behind inflation. So what we call real incomes are falling. When real incomes are falling, purchasing power is falling, that really slows the economy down. We were meant to be in the middle of a V-shaped recovery. That's what we were telling ourselves during the pandemic we could look forward to. And yet, a combination of factors, coming out of lockdown, the global economy has not fully rebooted and big parts of China are still in lockdown, big what we call supply chain issues. A lot of the world's cargo ships are still in the wrong places. The logistical wrinkles that the pandemic caused to the global economy are nowhere near being ironed out. And then, of course, on top of that, we already had inflation at a 30-year high before this ghastly war in Ukraine. And, of course, that has sent fuel and now increasingly food prices significantly higher.
Is the fundamental problem the amount of fake money, if I might describe quantitative easing in that way? That 80%, I sometimes read, of the dollars that are around at the moment have been printed in the last couple of years. Is it that? Is it because they kept their finger on that button, printing out unreal money stolen from the future, that's underlying so much of the situation in which we find ourselves?
You and I have talked about this in the past, and I've been one of the few newspaper columnists who, since the global financial crisis back in 2009, has written consistently about so-called quantitative easing. They invent a word that's so hard to say, we're not meant to discuss it, right? We're not talking about physical dollars and physical pounds. What we're talking about is balances that the central bank creates, which the commercial banks then lend out several times over. Most money in the world is an idea rather than a physical thing. It's a computer readout on someone's screen or increasingly their smartphone. But it's certainly the case that we've done more quantitative easing during lockdown, so the central bank has created more money during the 18 months of lockdown than we did during the whole of the previous decade in response to the global financial crisis. What happened after the global financial crisis, Neil? It was right to create some more money to lubricate the system. A lot of banks were shutting down because they'd been mismanaged, often in a corrupt and criminal way. So it was right to create some more money. But that emergency medicine became like a lifestyle choice. It became crack cocaine. A lot of it went into financial markets. It boosted share prices. Governments could use it to buy their own debt and spend more money without interest rates going up. And we almost weaned ourselves off that funny money, that massive additional money creation, by the time we got to about 2018, 2019. And then the lockdown came along and gave a kind of a concoction of interests, governments, financiers, another big excuse to crank up those virtual printing presses once more.
Having said all of that, isn't the floodwater going to rise higher than it has risen in living memory? I mean, of course, in straightened times, the same people, the poorer people, the most hard-pressed, they always get wet when the floodwater rises. But isn't it the case that it's going to be middle classes and those who have hitherto felt themselves insulated against this kind of crisis that are going to feel it, whether they know it's coming yet or not?
Well, inflation is, at its essence, a tax on the poorest. The people who've got least money, they're the ones that suffer most when the value of money is eroded. People who've got savings, so often middle-class people who've spent a generation pulling themselves out of the poverty that maybe their parents experienced. A lot of our viewers will be in that situation. Those savings get eroded by inflation. I do think inflation is partly coming from that money creation that you talked about. For instance, Switzerland isn't in the euro. It isn't underneath the auspices of the European Central Bank, which has done massive money creation. It has its own central bank. Inflation in Switzerland is 2.4%, which is easily the lowest in the developed world because it hasn't been part of the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, which have massively expanded their money supply. On the other hand, you talked about the floodwaters going higher than they have. What's different from the 70s is we don't have 50% plus of our population in a trade union. And often when we think back to our childhoods watching the news avidly, becoming the news junkies that we are, those trade unions were often quite militant. There is some trade union militancy around. Some people would say that's some trade union strength. Some people would applaud what the RMT are doing, for instance, to try and get a lot more money for train drivers. The public sector unions are still pretty strong. The doctors, the nurses, the teachers. I imagine we're going to see some strike action there as well. But what we don't have now that we had in the 70s, I think, is the real danger of what we call a wage price spiral. That's when inflation goes up, wage bargaining goes up, pushes wages up, that pushes the costs of companies, the goods that they then charge us, that feeds back into wages. That's how we got to inflation in the 70s of 25%.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to go there, but I do think we're going to go easily into the mid-teens before the Bank of England really does what the Federal Reserve in the US is doing at the moment, which is quite aggressively raising interest rates. It will be painful, but I think inflation will, once we do that, fall quite quickly out of the system, and a lot of these price rises will be tamed.
So you're sounding quite a positive note. I look around the world, as we all do. Sri Lanka has teetered over the brink into something desperate. And I've read and heard of 100 other countries around the developed world, South America, Asia, all over Africa, who are teetering on the same brink that Sri Lanka just fell over. If those dominoes start to fall, does that not push things beyond the control of...
I've said for some time that the big fallout from this Russia-Ukraine crisis will be food, and the countries that will suffer most are Horn of Africa, the Maghreb, and indeed the developing countries. Egypt, Lebanon, Eritrea, Somalia, all these countries rely on Russian and Ukrainian grain very, very heavily. Listen to people like David Beasley, who runs the World Food Programme. He's an American kind of multilateral guy. He's been really strong on this since the early March, a week or two. Now, Boris Johnson, we just heard from Polly there on the news bulletins, is saying, we're going to get all this grain out of Ukraine. The grain that's stuck in you, I've got quite a lot of connections across Russia and Ukraine. I used to be a foreign correspondent there. From what we know, the amount of grain that is stuck, it's about 20 million tonnes, which sounds like a huge amount. It's a tiny percentage, a tiny percentage of global grain production, which is about 1,200 to 1,500 tonnes a year. We're seeing the Indians blocking grain exports, their own grain exports now, because they're concerned about their food security. We're seeing political stirrings across the Maghreb. Remember, Neil, the Arab Spring was about food prices, and we're going to see something similar, the implications of spiking food prices, unfortunately leading to more poverty, starvation and political tumult, if you like, across some countries pretty close to Europe.
And here in Britain, we've got 30% of the farmland is to be rewilded. We've got farmers paid to leave fields fallow. They're stopping food production to make biofuels. You know, the extent to which we seem to be lagging behind the reality of the need for food security, I don't know. I can't make sense of it.
You know, we always say history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And as you say, look at the 70s, look at by 1973, inflation in the UK was accelerating to over 20%. Look at the reasons for that, about the unions and the rising wages, and also the oil crisis at that stage as well. All of those, history's repeating itself. Let's learn those lessons and look at it, because by listening to these discussions, you can find solutions.
Why, Liam, if I can ask you this, would a government here, in a country where we produce less than half of the food that we need anyway, looking out at the wider world where there's food insecurity and talk of a global famine, you know, another of the horsemen of the apocalypse is upon us. Why can't they swiftly turn around and say, a lot of these things that we had in mind, they belong to another world. We're now living in this world, and we must change tack.
You would have hoped that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the very immediate and sharp implications on fuel and food prices, which we can all see, you think that would have led to some grown-up decision-making, some realisation. And yet we've just watched Rishi Sunak this week, essentially relying on more borrowing, more taxation, more money printing. That's the great unspoken thing of last week, of the statement. We're not allowed to call it a budget, because if we called it a budget, it'd then have to produce revenue projections of how he's actually going to raise the money. That's why he's not calling it an emergency budget, right? So you don't have to produce the documentation.
Nor a windfall tax.
He's just press released 15 billion quid. But the thing I'd point out is that a fuel crisis, right? If you get the right people in the room, a bunch of people can solve a fuel crisis. If you get the Saudis in the room, right? You get the Venezuelans in the room, and you get the Iranians on the phone, you can produce more oil and gas quite quickly, and prices can come down. You cannot do that with food. And what's happening now, and it's happening here in the UK, is that the F's of farming, you need finance, you need fuel, and you need fertiliser, right? That's what farmers need. And the cost of all those things has gone up enormously. So even in this country, farmers are sowing a lot less wheat because fertiliser prices are 4, 5, 6 times higher per tonne than they were this time last year. Why? Because a huge amount of the world's potash and other nitrogen-based fertilisers are produced in Russia and Belarus, Russia's ally. And there's a blockade on that stuff.
And they can't afford the fuel to put in their combine harvesters to get the stuff.
Yeah, and that's why farmers are sowing less, and it's kind of building in next year's food price spike.
Thank you, Liam. Well, honestly, I could let this run on and on and on and on. I find it so fascinating, but thank you, Liam, for your insights. And a note of optimism there as well. Grown-ups in the room, that's what we need. After the break, we'll discover the so-called postcode lottery for end-of-life care for children in the UK.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. The loss of a child is the end of a world. Preparing for that loss in the case of incurable illness must be the hardest road for any parent to walk. Many families want and wish that their child might stay at home until the very end, and yet a report by charity Together for Short Lives has found that in most areas of England, families are often unable to choose appropriate end-of-life care at home. A postcode lottery means it simply depends where a family lives. Much of the problem is about money, inevitably, but campaigners are working hard to make the stay-at-home option available to all. I'm joined now by Andy Fletcher from Together for Short Lives, and also Jenny Ludford, whose son Charles was 11 years old when he was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumour. Good evening and welcome to you both, and thanks for your time. Jenny, if I can start with you, tell me what happened to Charles.
So, Charles was a really healthy, happy, sporty boy who played for Coventry City Academy, was scouted, he was an excellent footballer. And then one day he started to be sick, and only happened a couple of times a week, took him to the doctors. Obviously, they thought it was a virus. It's hard seeing those pictures, actually, of him ill. Within the 3 weeks until he was diagnosed, obviously the GPs thought it was an ear infection. There was various different diagnoses given because it's so rare to have a child with a terminal brain tumour of Charles's age. But one day he came down the stairs. It was actually Father's Day 2019. And he couldn't walk properly on one side of his body. He was sort of limping, and he kept saying his right hand felt strange. So we called an ambulance, and unfortunately, Dr. Google, you look it up, we put in his symptoms, and the first thing it pumped out was most likely brain tumour. My husband went to A&E with him that night in Warwick, near where we live, and at 4:30 in the morning, I remember getting the message that said they've seen something on his brain. He's being rushed to Birmingham Children's Hospital for an MRI. And literally the next day, he had the MRI. And, not long after that, they did a biopsy to confirm. But they then called us into a room and said to us, we're really sorry. Charles has got what's called a DIPG, a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. It is terminal. There is nothing we can do apart from 6 weeks palliative radiotherapy. And his expected life expectancy is 9 to 12 months.
My goodness. What a story to tell. And your experience, though, Jenny, was you received the help that you so desperately needed at that time, and your experience was that what you needed in your darkest day was available to you. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. The Warwickshire palliative team, amazing. We got discharged into their care about 2 months after Charles was diagnosed. At that point, the consultant who did the biopsy and who broke the news to us thought he only had weeks to live. So that was the 19th of August 2019, after he'd been diagnosed on the 15th of June. We thought we had literally weeks. He actually didn't die until the 13th of February 2020, quite a few months obviously later, and that was through the brilliant palliative care, I'm sure, that we were able to have at home. So he didn't have to go into a hospice, which would have been his worst nightmare. He hated hospital, and what it allowed us to do was to be able to have him at home, even in his own bedroom, because the palliative team managed to make adjustments to our house for things like having a stair robot, which he could sit on a chair and we could get him up the stairs with this robot that went up the stairs, operated by my husband and I, which then meant that we could keep him in his own room. And not have to change the lounge and do all these things that, made it more terrifying for him. So I think the palliative team in Warwickshire we're so lucky to have that. And I hate to think of any other family that doesn't have that choice. And when I actually see photos of children that I know have died, and I look at them, I think, gosh, they're in hospital. My first instinct is, gosh, the parents are obviously okay with that. But I'm guessing that they probably don't have a choice. If there isn't a good team of people that in your area can offer that end-of-life palliative care, then you have no option other than to be in a hospital or be in a hospice.
And Andy, if I could come to you now, that there seems tragically, it's such a shattering glimpse there that Jenny offers, but there's to add almost insult to injury, there seems to be a postcode lottery dictating so much of modern healthcare in this country. In cases like this, though, it feels especially unbearable. Why is it variable? Why can some areas provide that kind of staying at home as a choice while others can't?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It is unimaginable, and I want to thank Jenny for sharing that story. It's hugely powerful. I think, what we found in our report is that in 4/5 of areas in England, that standard, that choice is not available to families. And, as you say, that dictates a postcode lottery, depending on where you are in the country, depends on whether you have that choice as you approach the end of your child's life. I think there's a range of reasons for it, but I do think part of it is about the extent to which local areas prioritise children's palliative care and all the other things they've got to think about. And in Coventry and Warwickshire is a really good example of where local commissioners, the people who plan and fund those services, are making this a priority. And we think if it can be a priority in 1/5 of areas of England, it can be a priority in the other areas too. So I think some of it is about planning. Some of it is about workforce. We know that there aren't enough doctors and nurses being trained to look after these increasingly complex children at home. So we do need a plan to recruit and train and develop more doctors and nurses. And as you said at the outset, Neil, I think there is an element of funding. We estimate the shortfall is around £300 million, which in the grand scheme of NHS spending is obviously very small. We think that could have a really huge impact, not just on giving families that choice, which you've just heard for Charles was so hugely powerful, but also it will save the NHS money, because if children are looked after at home, particularly at night when they tend to be most likely to go into hospital, if we can keep children out of hospital, we save the NHS money. And also we support the well-being of families, because caring for a child with a life-limiting illness brings great joy, but it's hugely demanding. And if we get that care right at the end of life, then we support the physical and mental well-being of parents and siblings and the wider family.
Has this always been the case? It seems surprising that I would have thought that that nationally a priority would be children in that situation. And it doesn't seem, especially when you mention the relatively small sums of money, it doesn't seem too much to ask that the priority of families coping with those circumstances for their beloved child should have what they need, almost as a result of a national decision being taken to say, before anything else, this is a priority, we must have this.
Yeah, I think that's it has always been the case that children's palliative care is often supported and funded and by the generosity of the public. In children's hospitals, in children's hospices, and in the community, there are some great services out there. This isn't about the quality of the care that's available; it's just about the availability of it. I think there are some really good national standards and guidance and guidelines that local areas should be following. And, the government and NHS England have put some really good kind of national standards in place around this. But the reality is, on the ground, there's a big difference between those national ambitions and what's happening locally. And I think that's about, as I said at the outset, people taking it more seriously and understanding that the needs of these children and families are complex. And there's going to be a growing number of them. You know, we know it's trebled. The number's trebled in the last 20 years. We expect it to grow by another 50% in the next 10 years. So this is a challenge that's not going to go anywhere. And we need, as I said, national and local NHS decision making to really start to prioritise this group of children.
Jenny, you were nodding in agreement or in recognition with what Andy was saying there. What in particular was coming forth there that you would want to stress, given your particular experience?
That illnesses don't discriminate. You know, these life-threatening illnesses like cancer and all the rest of it don't discriminate on where you live, your age, your gender, your sex, anything. They happen. And, you know, it's only right that if you live in any part of the UK, you should be able to get the same choices and care that I have where I live. And, you know, there is nothing worse than knowing that your child's going to die. And, you know, at that point, anything that you can do to try and take the fear away for them, to stay together as a family. You've often got other children. So, you know, Charles has got a sister, Izzy, who's nearly 16. You know, the very fact that we could stay at home, he could be in our house, and she could come home from school and she could see him in the morning, and you know, we could eat meals together. Trying to keep a family together when you're facing back and forth trips to hospitals and all the horrible things that go on is so important, particularly when you know that you're going to lose one of those key members of the family. So I just think that the government, however it's funded, should be making sure that whether you live in Buckinghamshire, London, Oxfordshire, Warwickshire, wherever, that if you have a child that's got a life-limiting illness or, you know, terminal illness, the parent should be given the choice. And some parents will want to have the child in hospital or in a hospice because they're around other children, but you should be able to have that choice offered to you. And for us, you know, we could have lots of people call and visit us, his friends, relatives, and then the palliative team came as well, and they became part of our family. And I'm still good friends with quite a few of the members now, because they mean so much. It just means so much to have someone that you can stand on the doorstep when they're about to go, and you can I'd be there for like half an hour every time they're about to go, and just go, and what do I say about this, and how do I answer that? And, you know, we would just chat away from Charles, who was safe in our house, and I had that kind of help and care on the doorstep. And there's nothing better than that. Hospitals are scary places, and hospices are amazing places, but your own home, where a child's got their toys, their things they like to watch, you know, their own bed, their sofa, and their parents and their sister and, you know, siblings, there is nothing better than that for a child that, you know, it hasn't got long.
Jenny, I'm at a loss for words to express all of the feelings that you've brought for me. And the images there of your beautiful boy, I don't know anything else that I can say other than, you know, I'm sure what you've had to say will have chimed so strongly with others who are going through something similar. So I cannot thank you enough for your bravery and coming forward with that account. So thank you so much, and also to Andy, such an important charity. It doesn't sound like too much to ask in the scheme of things, having seen the sorts of sums of money that our health service seems to shift around in other areas. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a lot more to come before the end of the show, so at the moment, I think we should go quickly to a break.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking largely dry with some sunshine, though there will be a cool breeze. Let's home in on the detail. In the southwest of England, a good dry start to the day, some sunny spells, though it will feel chilly in the shade first thing. Moving over to the southeast of England, where it'll likely be dry and probably sunny, more northwestern outskirts though cloudier. For South Wales, the morning the best part of the day for sunshine. Temperatures around 10 degrees Celsius, but cooler in the countryside. For the northwest of England, they'll have some early sunshine for Lancashire and Merseyside, but in Cheshire, more in the way of cloud, especially further south, perhaps the odd spot of rain there as well. Over to the northeast of England, where the onshore breeze will bring a fresh start to the day, as well as some showers. Further inland, likely to be a little drier and sunnier. In southern Scotland, a fine and dry start to Sunday, though probably a little chilly in the countryside, where there may be some odd grass frost overnight. Finally westwards to Northern Ireland, where it'll be a cool but dry start to the day, feeling pleasant enough in any sheltered sunshine, with temperatures at around 10 degrees Celsius. Throughout the rest of the morning, sunshine becoming more limited and showers starting to break out, especially in the southwest. And that's how the weather's shaping up tomorrow.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, and before I move on, I should just read this from Adrian on email. Palliative care for a child should be a top priority. Everything should be there for what they need, no exceptions. What a lovely, touching interview with Charles's mum. And I agree, what a very strong and impressive person Jenny was. It was a privilege to listen to her. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then an exhibition in London right now might require microscopic vision for the best effect. The Small is Beautiful exhibition showcases 143 miniature works of art by 34 artists from around the world, specialising in creating the titchiest, tiniest wonders imaginable. My next guest is David A. Linden, an engineer by profession, but now creating works so small they sit on the heads of pins or in the eyes of needles. David attracted special attention recently for recreating Van Gogh's Starry Night and sunflowers inside the eye of a needle. I kid you not. David is here now, big as life, full size.
Hello, good evening. Hi, how are you, Neil? Lovely to chat to you.
This is that I have run across this, I would call it a phenomenon before. And I cannot believe it's true or possible to make these items. Why the determination to make art so small it can barely be seen with the naked eye?
I love the challenge. I love the challenge to be able to take to look at when you have a piece of art It's a wondrous thing, but to be able to put it into the eye of a needle, I just love the challenge. I love the surprise on people's faces when I show them the art. They're gobsmacked. I don't enjoy doing it. I don't. I have to put myself into a zone, and I have to calm my heartbeat. I have to squeeze my fingers together so hard it hurts. I have to work at night, because the vibrations of traffic as they pass by, they shake the microscope that I use, and they shake the art. So I have to work at night when there's no traffic, when it's nice and quiet, and I calm myself down. I have to work between heartbeats. I have to squeeze my fingers together so hard. I don't know why I do it. It really is not pleasant. But when it's finished, to see the joy on people's faces, that makes it all worthwhile.
We're looking at images there. That pink elephant in the eye of a needle. The magnification is such that it shows how rough the eye of the needle actually is at the magnification.
It's surprising, isn't it? Yes.
And
yes, it's
what happens
when you look through a microscope. Something which is, if you look at the gold wedding ring, for instance, it's nice and shiny, a beautiful thing. But you look at it under a microscope, and it looks like chopped wood. Something which you think is nice and hard, you look at it under a microscope, it's like porridge. There's another world under a microscope. The laws of physics don't seem to, they seem to be different under a microscope.
I'm guessing that, but there must have been at least one occasion when you breathed out at the wrong moment and your fledgling work of art just disappeared.
Yes,
you're talking about specks of dust. Famously, I created Amy Winehouse a number of times. The first one I did was okay, but I thought I wanted to improve, so I'm never happy with my work. I always want to get better. And the second Amy Winehouse I created, I was so pleased with it, and I was carrying it, just moving it from just across the desk into the eye of a needle, and it disappeared. And once it leaves my vision, once it disappears from under the microscope, because it's so tiny. Where is it? We were on the floor at 2 o'clock in the morning, hands and knees with a flashlight, trying to find this thing, trying to find Amy Winehouse in the carpet, and I never found her. So I had to go and make another one. I was so heartbroken, but the only way to overcome that disappointment is to go and make another Amy Winehouse straight away. Talk about Back to Black.
This is the Banksy triptych. This is my version of Banksy, the flower thrower, and this was delivered today to a very, very happy client who paid quite a bit of money for this. This is the most expensive piece of art that I've ever produced, and it's probably, I think, more expensive than the original Banksy for the size, because it's microscopic. You can see it's inside 3 needles. This is a world first, and the client came to me through my manager, Edward Hammond, info@hammondgalleries.com, and he commissioned me to make this piece of art. And I'm very proud of it. It's something quite extraordinary, and the client is more than happy, very happy indeed. And the exhibition in London, I've got 6 pieces of art in London, and when I first went to set it up, I thought, this is good. There's a lovely artist over there. That looks really interesting. It's a piece of wool which has been sculptured into the shape of an elephant, and there's other artists with lots of interesting creations all around the room. But when I was set up later on in the afternoon, I went through to the bottom of down to the end of the room, and there's a corridor, and it's like an Aladdin's cave. There's room upon room upon room of artwork, and small is beautiful. It's brilliant. You can spend hours there. And we did. My family came after we'd set up. We spent the rest of the afternoon wandering around this exhibition, because it's at the old auction rooms, the Christie's auction rooms on Brompton Road. And so this is my first big exhibition in London, and I'm so proud to be part of the exhibition.
There's something that's almost existential about this. I mean, the fact that the world's collection of the kind of art that you're talking about could probably be put in a soup spoon. All of it together, and that you and I are talking, and there's so much evident passion coming from you about items which in reality are little bigger than specks of dust.
It's
and you
crazy.
and I, two
It's
full-grown
crazy.
people,
But it's
can
the
get so
wonderful
fired
thing.
up
You've
about
got
them.
You got a fantastic piece of art, and you appreciate it for what it is. And then you see that it's so small. You think, how on earth was that created? How did the artist make it so small? And then to have it on display with 34, 35, 36, I think. The number's increasing, but it's the best artists from around the world all exhibiting in one place. My goodness, it's definitely something I would not miss out. If you're in London, you've got to go and see this exhibition.
I've just got this image in my head of there must be times in which all 34 of you around the world are working on these specks of dust all at the same time, all of you holding your breath, all of you trying to lower your blood pressure, all of you peering down the lens of microscopes, and all of you creating things that can only be seen through the lens of a microscope. I've never heard the like. No. It's absolutely
we must be completely mad. But, I mean, to be honest, at the exhibition, my work is the smallest. There's nobody microscopic, but there's so much variety there. There's a very well-created doll's house full of intricate detail. There are paintings, there are sculptures, there are models created of fantastical sort of spaceships, and it's so colourful. There's so much variety. I don't think there's anybody there there's no art which is repeated. Everybody's so different.
Words fail me, David. I'm going to have to move on, though, although I could absolutely hear more of your enthusiasm. What can I say? Dream big, work tiny. It's fantastic.
I know you wanted me there in person, but I had to deliver the art to the customer. Lovely to chat to you. Thank you very much.
David A. Linden, absolutely extraordinary stuff. How do you follow that? I don't know. Well, here we go. We're going to follow that. Imagine earning £30,000 a month by acting as the middleman or woman between the online marketplace and the supplier and selling products you don't even actually stock yourself. That is the case with my next guest, 21-year-old Kamil Sattar, who quit his job at Primark and started his own drop shipping, for that is the trade, drop shipping company, that now turns over £2.2 million a year. Kamil now teaches online classes structured around his unique business model, and I'm delighted to say that Kamil joins me now. Kamil, tell me more about this. You're going to have to explain for me and the rest of what I would imagine are most of the uninitiated, what is drop shipping?
Okay, first off, I want to say thank you for having me on today.
Welcome.
And drop shipping is basically where you have an online website online. It can be on Amazon or it can be on Shopify or WooCommerce, just an online hub. And you are selling products, whether it can be anything, it can be makeup brushes, anything. And you don't physically have the inventory in your warehouse or in your house. You basically have a supplier, whether it be in China, whether it be in the EU, and they handle all the inventory for you. So when there is an order on your website, instead of you having to go and post it at the post office, that supplier will then send it directly to your customer.
What is it that you do? What do you bring to the table that those suppliers cannot achieve for themselves?
The thing with suppliers is they haven't learned the advertising game, so they are not professionals at advertising. The only thing they're good at is manufacturing and basically sending things out. They don't know how to advertise on Facebook, Google, YouTube and things like that.
Tell me about your life before this.
So growing up at school, was never very academically gifted, never really found it easy to be at school, found it very tough. Didn't get any GCSEs when I left. Went to college, did a business diploma, dropped out because didn't really enjoy doing any of that kind of stuff. And then I got a job at Primark after I quit, and I was there for about 8 months, always on probation, never got off probation, just because it wasn't really doing the stuff I was meant to be doing when I was there. I couldn't find it enjoying, and then...
So talk me through your day now. What is a day in the life of a drop shipper?
Okay, so for me personally, it's more about waking up, going for a run, come back, look at my emails. So I've got a team in place now on Slack where I manage all the team from VAs, which handle customer support, fulfillment, speaking to suppliers, also speaking to my advertising agency on how the ads are doing on Facebook. So I spend around about 3 to 5 hours right now managing the stores.
And what is it that you put out there online that draws people in and makes it so evidently worthwhile for your clients?
So are you on about like the people that buy the products from our stores?
What is it? If I go on and see what it is that you're doing, what is it? What are you actually doing?
As the dropshipper?
Yeah.
So what we do is we create very compelling advertisements where, at the moment, TikTok's very popular. So we are using TikTok right now, and people will watch that video and they'll be like, wow, it looks natural. It doesn't look like an advertisement. It looks so natural. And they're like, wow, that product could be used in my life right now, so I want to buy it. A lot of people don't know these products exist, and you're basically educating them and telling them, wow, this product exists. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that even existed. So then they buy it off your website.
Benjamin, do you feel as if you've missed a trick here? You do all the things that you do, you study all the things that you study, and here is an entrepreneurial opportunity that was just out there waiting to be grasped.
I still don't fully understand it. I do think, however, that advertising, as you were saying, is going to get much more about being natural and not seeming sort of contrived, or that like you're trying to force a product on someone, but actually meeting the needs of people, understanding them, anticipating their needs better than they sort of do themselves, and showing them something in a way which isn't force it in your face, go on, take this. When people are conscious that they're being advertised to, they're resistant to it, they push back. When it's framed in a different way, when it's more sort of like a friend in a pub saying, oh, have you heard of this really cool new thing? It's that a lot more trustworthy. So I think that sort of idea I really respond to.
So you were nodding along with that. Is that the case? Is it about establishing your presence on screen as someone to be trusted, someone credible and believable?
Yeah, so with dropshipping, with any business in any industry, there's people in that industry that make it bad. They do things like they don't even send the product out. There's people that do not send the product out to their customer. They just take the payment and they run off. Yeah. But with anything in life, it doesn't matter what business you do, there's people that are very unethical, and there's people that do ethical things, like they try and get the best shipping times, they try and get really good customer service, they make sure the quality of the product's good, and that, myself, is what I tell people to do. Don't try and take shortcuts, because it'll just come back at you and it won't be worth it in the end. So, like you said, there are...
It isn't. I know about dropshipping and the statistics.
I know
about dropshipping. It's good. You are the Robin Hood of e-commerce, I think, is working out something. But the principle is this: effectively, you are the middleman between the things. There's a couple of issues, because only about 5% of people actually do it properly and make money from it. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary, but what I'll also say is it doesn't matter what you do in life, in business, it's the same percent ratio, 5%. Whether you're on Wall Street trying to become a fund manager, your rate of getting there is 5%. It doesn't matter what you do.
It is a good point. So but fantastic statistics. You say 30,000 off 2.2 million turnover, I think is your last one. The question I always have is about, you talk about customer service, because you take no risk, you take no stock. You basically tell whoever's the producer, ship it to this customer. What happens when things go wrong?
Yeah, so there's been many times where things go wrong in my instance. I remember when I had a store and we sold fishing rods. Right. And we were doing really good numbers with it back in 2019, 2020. And the supplier would send out the wrong sizes, the wrong variants. They would be broken when they get to customers. And I just had to refund them all, and I took a big loss.
And that's the problem, because you're taking that risk, which is why it's only 5%.
Yeah.
I love the other thing I love, Camel, as well, is the idea, if we combined it with the previous story about the elephant in the eye of a needle, we could have a camel in the eye of the needle, and you could be the inspiration for the next bunch.
What I'm thinking automatically, really, is people watching you, especially maybe people your age, are going to think, yes, that is the way. And you talk of 5%. It really, and you're making it sound relatively straightforward. You've clearly got skills, and what is your unique selling point that so evidently lends itself to what it is that you're doing?
So what I'd say is it's definitely not straightforward dropshipping. It's very complex, very hard. It's very hard to learn in terms of what's the common new trend. In terms of what do I have, I'm nothing special, I've not got any GCSEs.
Yeah, but everyone that's special always says they're nothing special.
No, honestly, the only
thing... It's a defining characteristic of special people.
Absolutely.
The only thing that I've got that most people don't have is I will never give up. Yeah. Even in the worst times, I will not say, you know what, I want to go away and not do it. And that's the thing with me. I work very, very hard.
It's a work ethic, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's one of the things. And one of the things you teach people is to have that work ethic, so you're more likely to be within the 5% who succeed than the others who don't.
See, with the 5% ratio that we have, it's not that it has to be that number. It's just unfortunate that only 5% of the people that try these things have it in them to carry on throughout the bad times,
Yeah. Is this the same as being an influencer? Is there a crossover, or do you stand apart from that and feel clearly defined as a drop shipper?
See, it's tough because when you teach people online how to do it, you come under the influencer. But I don't really like to be that kind of person. I just want to teach everything that I do for free. Hence, I make these free 9-hour courses. I do 9-hour videos on YouTube. 9 hours. People try and sell that stuff for $500.
Yeah.
And I destroyed that whole industry. And people hate me for it.
I mean, one of the best ways of explaining it, I mean, you do the website, the layout, it's all about the automation.
Yeah.
And so basically you are the shop window, but the supplier does all the donkey work in terms of supplying it and looking after customers.
It's an exciting time. I mean, clearly this is an exciting potential for anyone who's got the energy, the enthusiasm and the commitment to get into it. There's some low-hanging fruit out there. Kamal Sattar, that is an extraordinary story to end on, and thank you so much. I'm sure that will have put lights on in various heads, in various homes around the country. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks as always to my panel, Andrew Eborn, lawyer and broadcaster, and Benjamin Loughnane, research fellow at the Bow Group. Next up, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Don't touch your...
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's